As funny as this might sound, for the past 5 years, I've always associated the holiday season with the Mega Man franchise. I wish I had more pictures to show you, but for Christmas 2017 and 2019, I had tons of fond memories playing these games over Christmas break. This was during the peak of my Mega Man obsession, and whenever I think of where this series really started to hook me, as well as my most fondest memories with it, I always tend to associate it with a Christmas tree, bright Christmas lights, a Phineas and Ferb Christmas special playing in the background, and a working furnace that I no longer have. It's a surefire way to get me in the Christmas mood. So for the past 5 years, I've had a semi-annual tradition to do something Mega Man related during the holidays, whether it's buying a Mega Man related product or re-experiencing one of the various games to get some of that holiday nostalgia. I mean, it works out. December is the franchise's birthday month, and seeing how I'm the only person who acknowledges this franchise's 35th anniversary, I figured that this December I really wanted to do something more sentimental, for lack of a better term. And seeing that I've already played through and discussed the classic series earlier in the year, I think it makes all the sense in the world just to sit back, relax, and play through the entire sextology again, just for old time's sake. Wait a minute. By the early to mid 1990s, the Mega Man brand was the most popular it has ever been, with 6 fantastic games on the NES, tons of comics and TV shows, a surprising amount of Game Boy ports, as well as the introduction of an entirely new sister series that would alter the franchise forever. This franchise had seen an unprecedented amount of success in unprecedented amount of time. But with the sheer amount of content that was being pumped out, inevitably there are going to be those 1 or 2 that go forgotten or just remain inaccessible to a grander majority of people. Some might have simply just been underpromoted, some might have been unfortunate victims of region locking, or in some cases, they might have been exclusively released on a digital storefront that hasn't seen the light of day in almost 30 years. Funnily enough, all of which describe the exact circumstances of this game right here. Mega Man: The Wily Wars. Released right around the time when the classic series was wrapping up and the X series was a new hotness, the Wily Wars acted like a humble reminder of where the franchise started. It was a collection of the first 3 installments of the classic series with a slick 16-bit makeover. However, not only would this collection be exclusive to a niche digital online service, but it would be available exclusively on the very console that its adversary was rivaling. Right, so remember, up until this point, every Mega Man release was made exclusively for Nintendo platforms. So at face value, having the origins of the series be exclusive to the exact console that it was competing against seems incredibly backhanded and weird. However, it's important to understand that by this point, the success of the Sega Genesis was simply too hard to ignore, because both it and its software did numbers. And understandably, many third parties were hopping onto the Genesis in hopes of getting some of that Sega money, and Capcom was absolutely no exception. They released a few projects up until this point, neither of which really doing all that well financially aside from the Street Fighter ports, but the Wily Wars was positioned to be Capcom's big release for the Genesis, a release that apparently wasn't even made in-house and was outsourced to Mikanuchi Engineering, a name that you will definitely be hearing again, don't worry. Now, all this is great and good, but as I've been alluding to throughout this entire video, this game was only available on a niche online service known as the Sega Channel. It more or less functions as many of the online services now, and includes a lot of the same features, but it also featured games that are exclusive to it and it only, and wouldn't be available by any other means. Now, I'm drawing a blank as to why they could have possibly opted to make it an exclusive. I have a feeling that it was probably due to Capcom wanting to keep a healthy relationship with Nintendo of America, because although physical versions of this game were released in other parts of the world, Mega Man games were still coming out on the Super Nintendo and Game Boy, and it'd be pretty weird to have it on store shelves next to the games of that same series on competing hardware. Either that or Sega just didn't want a game called Alien Soldier headlining their new online store. So, given the circumstances in which this game was released in, it's pretty easy to understand why this game remained inaccessible for so long. It actually wasn't until recently where this game started to get re-released, thanks to its inclusion on the Sega Genesis Mini and Nintendo Switch Online services respectively. Gonna be 100% honest though, I have no idea what took them so long given how many Genesis collections already exist, but regardless, I'm very glad that they finally got around to it. And besides, what fun would it be if it was released on a disc? This game was made for an online service, so it's only fair to play it on an online service. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, nerds and geeks, and all my queer non-binary peeps, this is the Mega Man collection that time almost forgot. Usually remasters and remakes don't really do a good job at explaining in-universe why these characters are experiencing these same events again. It's not something you're really supposed to think about, but the Wily Wars is the only remake I could think of that attempts to canonically justify the entire package. Apparently, thanks to the power of time travel, Wily manages to go back to the events of the first 3 games in an attempt to try and take over the world all over again, by using the exact same tactics as last time, by which Mega Man would already know how to beat. I mean, that's Wily for you. Now, the Wily Wars has a few differences and quality of life improvements that I feel is worth discussing before we go on to the actual games themselves. For starters, we got button mapping, which is a huge deal for freaks like me who prefer shooting with the B button. There are now save files, which effectively gets rid of the passwords from Mega Man 2 and 3, as well as no longer forcing you to beat Mega Man 1 in one sitting. For some reason, Mega Man 2 is only playable under difficult mode, the original Japanese difficulty. Never really understood that change, but whatever. And the big new one of the group, an exclusive mode in the form of Wily Tower, unlockable after beating all 3 games of the collection, but I haven't yet, so I probably shouldn't be talking about it. So, upon diving into these games for the first time, the very first thing that I immediately took note of was the visuals, and more specifically the art style and the art direction that they went with. The NES games were pretty by the numbers in terms of how they looked, and they generally strived to be a lot more charming and cutesy, if that's even the right word to use. But here, you can definitely tell that this was a game that came out after 1993, because the art style that the Wily Wars uses is a lot closer to something like Mega Man X, and admittedly, in a few cases, it is to its detriment. There are a handful of stages that look a lot darker than they used to be, and a select few stages have had 16-bit interpretations that confuse me more than they wow me. Like, I don't think Top Man's stage was ever meant to look like this. Which also ties into another issue that I have with the visuals. A lot of these areas have been turned into generic factories, which admittedly isn't entirely this game's fault. When a majority of the stages in the originals are located in some sort of factory setting, there's only so much you yourself can do to make them stand out. But this game makes a pretty committed effort in doing so. These games know that they're on more powerful hardware, and fully utilizes the capabilities of the Sega Genesis. Although these areas may be darker, the amount of detail and polish present here is undeniable. So many of these areas have a ton of cool visual effects, much more advanced use of parallax scrolling, while still all remaining relatively faithful to the source material. Everything still remains cartoony and comic book-like, but it also has that nice dash of Mega Man X flavored grit, resulting in a game that reaps the benefits of both styles. And I'm just gonna go out on a limb here, but Wily Wars has my favorite 16-bit sprite of Mega Man. It's not as stylized as the X sprite or as expressive as his Get Up in 7, but this is probably the closest a 16-bit version of the character has gotten to looking as he did on the NES. But even still, I just love how everything looks in action. I love the little animation that plays whenever he respawns. I love how if you go and switch weapons while on a lyre, he does this cute little pose upon letting go. Like, things like these aren't in many classic action platformers, and I was incredibly happy to see a game like this just have so much detail. And man, for as much as I've been gushing about the visuals, I'm really liking a lot of the new remixes for these games. Even though I've heard better renditions of these songs, official or otherwise, many of these tracks still slap me in my stupid hairy face. But let's not go and judge a book by its cover. These are remasters of 3 landmark NES titles, and over and above everything else, the quality of said games needs to remain intact in order for this to be a success. And in regards to that, I have quite a few things I'd like to address. When you play these versions for the first time, you probably won't immediately pick up on anything wrong. But the more you play, the more you'll start to pick up on a few subtle changes that quickly build up over time. For one, damn near everything in this game has completely different timings to get used to. Enemies, bosses, stage hazards, you name it, they all move and behave in completely different ways, by far making these games a lot more treacherous than they were originally. But that doesn't really compare to my biggest issue with this game. An issue that's not very noticeable on your first playthrough, but the more you play, and especially if you go back and play the originals, you'll instantly notice the problem. The Mega Buster in these versions is slow. The shots from the Mega Buster simply don't travel as fast as they're supposed to, and I found that a major downside to this is the fact that the enemies now take much longer to defeat. No joke, enemies that were complete pushovers are now the bane of my existence thanks to this incredibly subtle change, and it only gets worse when paired with the different enemy behaviors. This is something that also seems to affect the bosses, as their weapon weaknesses also move a lot slower, meaning that they don't deal nearly as much damage as they should, so as a result, it can take you twice as long to deal with them. And that's not even mentioning the copious amounts of collision detection issues and the weaknesses just not working. I can say with absolute certainty that these are the hardest versions of their respective games due to all of these things. But I don't know, man, a lot of this just seems like artificial difficulty to me. It feels like most of these inconveniences only exist to make these games artificially harder rather than actually testing you in a fair and balanced way. And intentional or otherwise, that's something that I strongly dislike. But even still, I can't be too mad at the devs for this. Allegedly, development of this game was incredibly rough and was actually part of the reason why the game was outsourced. And when looked under that lens, all these problems seem a bit more understandable. And also, it's still Mega Man. Even though it's jank and frustrating in a lot of places, at the end of the day, I'm still playing 3 fantastic action platformers with a gameplay style that I simply can't get enough of. And actually, the more I played through each game, the more I actually started to appreciate some of the more challenging additions. I can actually appreciate the slower fire rate, and I like how it actually forces me to pay attention to enemy patterns as opposed to just autopiloting my way through them. The slow fire rate also inherently incentivizes you to use your weapons more within the stages, given the fact that they deal more damage, which is pretty much exclusively how I played through Mega Man 2. It's probably the only time abusing the metal blades is actually a good thing. But the thing that I appreciate the most about the Wily Wars is the fact that we have an entirely new mode in the form of Wily Tower, unlockable upon completing all 3 games in the collection. This mode has garnered quite a bit of attention from many people, and is generally the thing that this collection is most remembered for. And the reason why has to do with this. For the first and seemingly only time, you get to pick and choose the weapons and gadgets from all 3 of the games. Some of the most broken weapons in the series can all be under one arsenal, and the fact that this game allows you to experiment like this is awesome. But with that being said, this game knows full and well what it's allowing you to do. There are additional 3 robot masters to take down, all of which having entirely new level designs to go with them. And these levels are nothing to scoff at. These levels in general can be pretty tough, and the bosses can be very, very unforgiving. But to make up for this, you could find blocks throughout the stages that have extra life and weapon energy, and most of the bosses have more than one weakness, allowing these guys to go down a variety of ways. And also, the music in these stages truly surprised me. It doesn't necessarily slap me in my face, but it more so flicks me in my nuts. I was impressed at how much variety there was between all 3 of the tracks, all of which giving off completely different energies and vibes. But the thing that really impressed me the most about this mode had to be the Wily Tower itself. We got some more of the creative use of assets from the first games, but I really want to shed light on the bosses because they were by far the thing that surprised me the most. Unlike every other Wily castle in existence, the bosses here are super well thought out and are an absolute joy to fight. The designs of them are also super creative and really test you in how well you can utilize their weaknesses to defeat them. By far, some of the best sets of bosses the franchise has seen yet, and the Wily Wars in general is just as good as people have been saying that it is. Perfectly portrays everything that makes classic Mega Man good on one clean package. Speaking of cleaning up packages, I'm gonna have a really difficult time attempting to sum up this one. In all honesty, I didn't think I'd have this much to say about it, because at face value, it seems so simple. It seems like just your regular, everyday 16-bit translation of a bunch of NES games. But it's only ever when you actually play it where there are just so many things that catch you off guard in both a good and a bad way. It's very hard for me to really give a concrete opinion on it, because for every cool thing that they added, there are at least 2 or 3 additional changes that exist for no discernible reason, and I don't know how well that's going to go over with the general public. I'd say that if you are curious and just so happen to have the expansion pass on NSO, I don't think it'd hurt to give this game a shot. For one, it's probably the most definitive version of the collection, as it runs at its original speed and doesn't suffer from any slowdown issues as the PAL and European versions of this game do. And secondly, even with its flaws, I feel like most Mega Man enthusiasts would appreciate and just admire its existence. Whether it was intentional or a consequence of this game's hellish development cycle, this game goes about the remake treatment in an entirely different way. Its various changes and new additions makes these games feel a lot more fresh. You're not just playing these old games again with a 16-bit filter. These are versions of the games that change up everything you thought you knew about the originals. And whether or not it surprises you or annoys you, I feel like that's something that most people can appreciate. But man, I just really wish that they gave this idea another shot. I mean, seeing that there are more 8-bit games to pull from, why not give those games the Wily Wars treatment? If only we did get a sequel to the Wily Wars containing 4, 5, and 6. Hopefully they'd iron out most of the original's issues, get rid of most of the jank, and maybe, if they had the resources, add an entirely unique mode similar to the Wily Tower. Well, that was fast. From the millisecond that I found out about its existence, I knew that Mega Man The Sequel Wars was damn near exactly what I was hoping it'd be. Created by Woodfrog and the entire Mega Man Sequel Wars team, this game does to Mega Man 4 through 6 what the original did to Mega Man 1 through 3. It does every single thing that the Wily Wars does so much better. The visuals look just as good and in a few areas even better than they did in the Wily Wars, further amplifying the strengths of this art style. The Buster now thankfully moves at its original speed, keeping the pace of the game a lot closer to the originals. The enemy behaviors are still slightly altered, but most have the same timings as they usually do, and even when they don't, they're usually nowhere near as drastic as they were in the Wily Wars. We got the addition of the charge shot, the music is absolutely fantastic. I could say with certainty that this game is exactly what you sign up for, and none of the differences ever really took away from the core experience. There's also so much attention to detail added, seemingly just for the sake of it. There are some added visual effects and lighting changes that look absolutely gorgeous. The Buster shots have upgraded visual effects every time you shoot. Similarly to the Wily Tower, you could swap between all the weapons of all three of the games, making each of the bosses have a multitude of weaknesses. And something that I was incredibly happy that they added was the weapon test screen from Mega Man 11. A completely unnecessary addition thrown in because they could. I love that. But I quickly want to spend some time on the EX mode and Dustman stage. This is a mode that completely remixes and reimagines the stages, coming equipped with new stage hazards, new enemies, and completely new level designs. It was also made to be so brutally difficult that they started to remind me of my father. This is awesome. Everything about this is so cool. And the fact that this is something that could potentially be done for every stage of the three games is extremely exciting. I'm absolutely loving the new set pieces here. They're all incredibly creative and make all the sense in the world regarding a trash compactor plant. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves, this stage is not perfect. I think my only thing with this stage is that some of the ways it goes about difficulty can be pretty damn obnoxious. Some of these enemy placements can be absolutely cruel, and many of the enemies that I hated in the original have gotten even worse simply due to how much more frequently they show up. But really, aside from that, I had an absolute blast playing this stage, and pretty much this entire package, as I can say for certain that this is the better of the two remakes. Despite the fact that it's a fan game, and despite the fact that this is only a demo, it's so much more faithful, ambitious, and leagues more polished. It realizes the potential of this 16-bit makeover and runs with it. Admittedly, most of the things I praise the Wily Wars for doesn't really apply here, but that doesn't change the fact that this collection in every way imaginable does all three of the games included justice, and act as worthy alternatives to those original versions. Easy recommendation to anyone interested. It's currently unfinished at the time of this video going up, as previously mentioned, but please go and show the project some love. It's by far one of the most interesting and passionate-filled fan projects I've ever played. And to Woodfrog and their team, here's hoping that the project gets finished. So, with all that being said, I hope everyone here has an absolutely splendid holiday. You know, the Christmas seasons seemingly only get more and more stressful by the year, but please, if you can, relax, spend some much-needed time with the people you care about, eat a lot of food, play some Mega Man if you can, and just take a mental breather. Trust me, I'm saying this as much to myself as I'm saying it to all of you. So, yeah, thank you all for your continuous love and support, and take care.